What if the answers you've been looking for aren't in your mind, but in your hand? Not as prophecy, but as memory. A story your body has been trying to tell you. Long before therapists asked you about your childhood, or before Freud ever sat in his study, there were others who read the self not through words, but through skin. There were sages and seekers who turned to the body not merely as a vessel of biology, but as a sacred script. Among the oldest of their tools were not stars or spirits, but hands. In temples and hidden schools, from India to Egypt, wise men traced the curves of palms not to entertain fantasies of wealth or marriage, but to interpret something much more intimate. They believed the hand was a visible extension of the self, a map drawn from the inside out, revealing the silent whispers of the soul. So even before the language of psychology found its formal voice, palm reading had already begun its own quiet conversation with the human psyche. To approach palm reading only as a fortune-telling ritual is to miss its richer symbolic dimension. It was never only about foreseeing what would happen. It was a way to understand what had already happened within. Carl Jung, who spent much of his life studying alchemy, astrology, Eastern traditions, and esoteric systems, understood that ancient practices often encoded psychological truths. These symbolic systems weren't primitive guesses. They were attempts to capture the invisible forces shaping human experience, like dreams, like myths. Palmistry may serve as a metaphorical mirror of the psyche, revealing how our internal patterns take root in the most visible parts of us. Whether or not the lines on your hand were written by fate, they might still reflect the story you carry and the parts of you you've forgotten to notice. Look closely at your palm, that arc beneath your thumb. Some say it tells you how long you'll live, but others believe it marks where your story broke and where it began again. At the center of most palms lies the lifeline, that swooping arc near the base of your thumb. Some say it predicts death. Others say it traces rebirth. Many believe it shows how long you will live. But when viewed through a psychological lens, it becomes something far more compelling. It represents vitality, not merely in the physical sense, but as a symbolic expression of your rootedness, your relationship to the body, and the way that you move through the world. A strong and deep lifeline could suggest someone with a tangible presence, someone who doesn't just exist in their mind, but inhabits their flesh fully, engaging with the world in a grounded, sensuous way. In contrast, a faint or fragmented line may point toward a history of psychic rupture, moments when something essential cracked, perhaps a formative loss, a personal crisis, or an experience that shattered the old path and demanded a new one. Jung might interpret these moments as thresholds in the process of individuation, turning points where the persona begins to fall away and the true self begins to emerge. And if that line branches off later in life, perhaps the body itself is signaling that your direction is changing, that your energy is being called somewhere new, not away from life, but into a deeper version of it. But the body doesn't only speak through vitality, it speaks through longing. Above the lifeline, closer to the base of the fingers, rests the heart line. This line has long been associated with love, intimacy, and emotional connection, often treated as a marker of one's romantic future. Yet, when examined through the lens of depth psychology, its meaning deepens considerably. Rather than pointing to external relationships or romantic outcomes, the heart line speaks to the internal architecture of feeling. It reflects emotional patterning, how one gives and receives love, or how trust is formed or fractured, and what unconscious habits shape one's relationship with closeness. A long and unbroken heart line may suggest someone who is open to affection, emotionally expressive, and at ease in the world of feeling. But a line that appears faint, broken, chained, or erratic may indicate the presence of emotional defenses, coping mechanisms, born from past wounds that now interfere with connection. Have you ever wondered where your love patterns come from? Your hand might already know. Carl Jung believed that psychological wounds often harden into complexes, emotional knots buried beneath the surface, yet powerfully active in our behavior. The heart line, in this sense, might become a symbol of such complexes, tracing the echoes of attachment injuries or unspoken grief. When the line forks at the end, this can symbolize an inner divide, the pull toward intimacy on one side, and on the other, the instinct to retreat or protect the self. This is not simply about fear of love. It is about a deeper tension between the longing to be seen and the fear that exposure will lead to pain. The palm then becomes not a prophecy, but a silent biography of how we have loved, how we have hurt, and how we might still be trying to bridge the distance between the two. But love isn't the only mystery etched in us. So is thought. Moving further down, across the center of the palm, lies the headline. Traditionally, it is said to govern thought, intellect, and decision-making. Psychologically, it becomes a representation of how the mind engages with the world. A straight headline might suggest a methodical, practical approach, while a wavy one could speak to a more intuitive, imaginative style of thinking. These patterns don't judge, they reveal. But when the headline splits into two, forming a fork, it invites a deeper reflection. That fork could indicate an internal division, a crossroad within the self. Do you live the life you choose, or the one someone else imagined for you? It speaks to the conflict between duty and desire, between the life one was told to live and the one that is quietly longed for. Jung often wrote about the tension of opposites within the psyche, how we are split between our conscious identity and the submerged parts of ourselves that also crave expression. The fork in the headline might symbolize that very tension, inviting us to acknowledge the divergence within and begin the work of integration. When the line grows fainter near the end, it may suggest a mind growing tired of rationalizing and is ready to surrender to something softer, perhaps intuition, perhaps feeling, or perhaps an entirely new way of knowing. Even deeper than thought, there is sensation, how we experience desire. Beneath the thumb lies a fleshy mound known in palmistry as the Mound of Venus. Traditionally, it is associated with sensuality, love, beauty, and pleasure. Yet beneath this lies something deeply psychological. The mound reflects how we relate to enjoyment and desire, how we experience the world through the senses. A full and soft mound might signal someone who is warm, emotionally generous, and unafraid of receiving pleasure. They find nourishment in connection and are not ashamed of the body's delights. A flatter or firmer mound, however, may suggest difficulty in allowing oneself to enjoy freely. How easily do you allow yourself to receive joy? your palm may be holding the answer. This does not necessarily mean the absence of desire, but possibly the presence of inner restraint. There may be guilt wrapped around joy, or an unconscious belief that pleasure must be earned or controlled. Jung believed that the shadow contains not only the dark or rejected parts of ourselves, but also the golden ones. The parts that we have denied, not because they're harmful, but because they felt too bold, too vulnerable, or too alive. The Mound of Venus may reveal whether pleasure lives within us as something integrated or something postponed. It invites reflection on how easily we allow ourselves to receive, and whether we still carry inherited rules about what is too much to want. A flatter or tighter mound, on the other hand, may suggest a life where pleasure became linked with shame, where joy was seen as a luxury or a danger. Jung taught that what we repress becomes the shadow, not just the dark or ugly parts of ourselves, but often the bright and joyful ones too. Many people exile their capacity for delight, thinking it's selfish or risky, until it becomes a ghostly absence in their own lives. The Mound of Venus might reflect this absence, acting as both an indicator and an invitation. What would it mean to reclaim pleasure without apology? To let the body sing instead of sigh? And then there's a line that only some people have, the one said to reveal destiny. The fate line, a vertical stroke that sometimes runs from the base of the palm toward the middle finger. While some hands bear this line clearly, others seem to lack it entirely. Its presence or absence can be revealing. In older traditions, it was said to show destiny, the hand of fate moving through one's life. But psychologically, it becomes a measure of authorship. A clear fate line might suggest someone with a strong inner compass, a sense of direction that flows from within rather than from external pressure. They are not necessarily bound to a specific profession or outcome, but they are aligned with a deeper sense of purpose. When the line is faint or missing entirely, it may suggest that the individual has yet to claim their story. They may have followed expectations, adopted roles, or remained passive to life's currents, without stepping fully into their own authority. Jung believed that each person must undergo the process of individuation to become who they truly are. The absence of a fate line does not imply failure. It may simply ask, have you truly chosen your path? Or are you still waiting for someone else to choose for you? Every tiny detail on the palm can be viewed symbolically if we choose to see it that way. A star, a cross, a break, an island. These are not just marks, they are metaphors. A chained heart line might reflect an entangled emotional past. An island along the lifeline might point to a moment of deep psychological exhaustion or depression. A break in the headline could signal a mental shift, a point where perception changed, possibly due to a crisis or an awakening. These are not omens, they are echoes. The psyche speaks in symbols, and the hand is merely one of its oldest canvases. Jung believed that the unconscious constantly tries to communicate with us through dreams, behaviors, and patterns, and perhaps the lines of the palm are just another such medium waiting to be interpreted. The more we ignore these signs, the more we are led by them unknowingly. The moment we begin to see them for what they are, the unconscious no longer runs our lives from the shadows. Your hand, then, is not a sheet of predictions. It is a personal myth made visible, the story of your becoming. It speaks in archetypes and contradictions, in beauty and in rupture. It carries the imprint of the hero you try to be, the child you once were, the lover you have loved or denied, the outcast you keep hidden. Each mound and line is part of the architecture of the self, sculpted over years of living, yearning, falling, and rising again. Jung often said that the self is not a fixed entity, but an unfolding process. The hand becomes a mirror of that process, recording the silent negotiations between the persona and the shadow, the ego and the soul. There is no need to believe your palm can foretell your future to find value in it. The deeper truth may be that it reflects the parts of yourself that are the hardest to see directly. It is both a record and a riddle, a mystery written in flesh. When you begin to read it, not with superstition, but with symbolic insight, you may start to recognize pieces of yourself that have long remained hidden. Perhaps it is not that the hand knows what is to come, but that it remembers what you've been trying to forget. And in that remembrance, there's the possibility of healing, of integration, of returning to the self you were always meant to become. So maybe the ancient art of palm reading has less to do with prediction and more so to do with remembrance. Maybe its real power lies in reflection, a mirror held not to your future, but to your forgotten self. And perhaps that's all we've ever needed. Someone to look at our hand and gently remind us of the story we were always meant to live. After all, the map was never out there. It was always in your hand.